teenagers are so addicted to video games that
For those addicted to the internet and online gaming, you could seven-year-old boy has almost died after playing his
Reports like these have only helped to sensationalise the problem, but the fact is, for a very real number of people, video games have had a devastating effect on their lives, as we discovered when we asked the Good Game community for their own stories.
Gaming became the only real world I knew.
I have no doubt that I was addicted to WoW. I placed it above everything else in my life.
I was in denial for a long period, still soaking up at least 10 hours of Halo a day, locked away in my dimly lit bedroom.
I had no contact with my friends outside other than those who played online.
It got to the point where I wasn't eating enough food because I just lost my appetite and I was so enthralled in the game.
Every gamer can relate to these stories on some level. We've all had moments where we could barely drag ourselves away from our favourite game. But is it fair to call these games addictive?
I'd make a number of key distinctions in this whole addiction field. One is between chemical addictions, things that involve substances, quite different to behaviours that people get stuck on. One of the classic ones has been gaming for a long time. There are whole sets of issues of overuse of those kind of interactive technologies. Now, I think that can be a problem, but, you know, whether it's better, I wouldn't describe it as addiction, but I would describe it as a set of problem behaviours when it starts to interfere with everything else you do and you really can't do anything else because you're stuck on this.
Internet use gaming disorder is now included in the DSM, the official manual used to diagnose mental illness.
The importance of a naming of a disorder in the DSM system is how much attention it attracts worldwide in the behaviour and in the condition.
If we know what it is, we can start to be consistent in the way that we identify individuals as having a problem. We can then conduct research and clinical trials, and we want to avoid classifying people who are merely healthy enthusiasts of video games as being problematic.
Goose is trapped forever! In Australia, we're trying to work out how much good, how to do good, but also how to monitor harm. So we're actually at the forefront of trying to take this on.
It's done. Good job.
So how can you tell if you or someone close to you is affected by such a disorder? What sort of signs should you look out for?
So some of the warning signs to look out for when it comes to your gaming getting a bit out of control is to overall look at the quality of your life in other areas decreasing as your gaming is increasing.
Really doing the thing over and over again and knowing that you want to stop, but you can't. You should be doing other things, but you can't. Other people are complaining at you to stop the thing, and you say you're going to stop, but then you go back and you do it again. So there's clearly that loss of control over making the decision. And really, even though you think you're in control, the realisation that you're not.
The most interesting fact, perhaps, is that this addition to the DSM combines gaming with internet misuse, and many believe this is inaccurate and it might lead to further misdiagnosis.
There should be a distinction between social media, general internet use versus gaming, because the mechanics behind each are quite different. The way that they encourage the person to stay on, the mechanisms are significantly different. So the effect that it has on the person and the way that a person would extract themselves from those situations, the treatment, the approach of that needs to be considered and adjusted for that. If you do a kind of blanket approach to it, you're not going to be in best service of the person.
I think it's fine to have these things under the same broad umbrella because they've got in common the behavioural rather than the chemical, and the sets of characteristics that were in the older gaming environment more on your own, but still visually appealing, novelty-seeking, cognitively engaging, is now being added to very much through the internet, through the capacity to do it sociably with multiple others. So I think they've got more in common than they have different. And the same kinds of people tend to get stuck in both.
When it came down to real-life interactions, I could only really answer in smiles and nods.
Everyday things revolve around it, like when and what we eat for dinner and what time we go to bed.
We both put on in excess of 25 kilograms and lost contact with all of our true friends and family.
Before officially being recognised, many who sought help for a gaming disorder found themselves diagnosed in a similar fashion to someone with a gambling problem.
Gaming is more comparable to gambling in that it's what you would consider potentially a behavioural addiction. It's a kind of compulsion or need to repeat the same or a series of behaviours over and over for a kick.
What has happened in recent years with pathological gambling and making these things more formal disorders is to say some people are not really in control of this stuff, and they may benefit from help. They may not be able to do it themselves. And psychology and behavioural medicine has a lot to offer in terms of our understanding of that. So instead of simply saying to people, you should stop, we can say, you know what, sometimes it's very hard to stop.
In the past, we've seen measures put in place to reduce the selling of substances that can go on to cause disorders such as alcoholism and smoking addiction. So with this new inclusion in the DSM, could we start to see legislation passed to reduce the selling of certain games? Or will warnings in games become even more prominent?
So the really upside of the whole DSM thing and calling disorders and whatever is encouraging help. It may be fun for a lot of people, but it's actually a problem for a set of people, and we need to have ways of perhaps constraining that in a public health-like way, just like we do with alcohol and tobacco and many other things, and with food products, etc. We do things to try and make those normal things safer.
Well, I think the greatest opportunity that the policymakers have is to do something about the online content, because there's a real lack of awareness of the pitfalls that can occur.
Just like the ever-shifting technology of games, the symptoms behind such a disorder are constantly changing and evolving too.
We need to not look just at how much time someone's spending or the sorts of games that they're playing. That content and exposure is not as important as the psychological relationship between the person and the game.
It's really, really useful to keep in mind that games basically reinforce you to play a certain way. They incentivise you to keep playing, to come back and so on. And that develops the habit over time. So to understand that if you're wanting to change things around, it's going to involve some willpower and repetition.
I still play games online, but only a few hours a day.
My husband and I now prioritise. Our bills, food and other responsibilities must come first.
Getting help and getting back out into the real world were the hardest things I'd ever done.
What we're going to get into is a more sophisticated discussion. For the internet generation, we've got to get into developing social rules that are appropriate. At the moment, that's a bit of a problem because most of the rules are being made up by kids as they go, and parents are still mainly horrified about what might be going on. So we just haven't quite worked it out. It's new. The technology is racing way ahead of the social rules and in many ways the health understandings, whether they're good or bad, that are associated with those behaviours.